Thank you very much. Also, thanks a lot for the introduction and the lead to AI regulation. So, welcome this morning. Happy to be here. Thanks for having us. Just a little note on YPOG. We are a law firm. I'm partner for the technology law section at the Berlin office. And at YPOG, we do venture capital financing, we do fund structuring, we do a lot of banking and finance regulation. And me, I'm kind of the lawyer for the operative business of tech companies. That means I talk and think about a lot about blockchain tools, for example, about AI software, about data privacy, about information technology law. And we see a development there that more and more of these technologies become regulated. And today, after this nice introduction, thanks a lot, Frederick, again, I like to talk about navigating the EU AI Act compliance challenges and opportunities. So in case you haven't heard of it so far, the EU AI Act is a regulation from the European Commission that actually means to regulate the use of AI software, so artificial intelligence software. It actually is part of like a larger framework of regulation for the digital space that the Commission came up a couple of years ago. So the General Data Protection Regulation was one of the first kind of building stones. Then came IT security topics that we cover a lot as well. You might know DORA, I guess, here involved in financial industry. And there's more IT security. There is regulating for non-personal data, like the Data Act. And then there's the EU AI Act that covers artificial intelligence software. And I will give an idea about how to actually stick to the compliance on the particular review of the financial and banking industry, and give some outlook how we actually can handle the compliance in the future. So to start with, EU legislation always covers different objectives. And the first one is obviously the establishment of a single European market. The idea is that when we have a single market and one legal framework all over Europe, we actually have a level playing field for all companies and they can more easily prosper and develop. So this comparison to the EU that we just heard before as well is sometimes a bit lagging behind because the US does not have like one uniform legal framework for all over Europe, US. For example, you have federal legislation. That is actually what was just pulled down by Donald Trump. But you still have like federal legislation, like in California and Colorado and Texas. They all have AI regulations. So it is kind of patchworky there. What we actually try to build, or the European Union try to build, is one legal framework for all over Europe so that companies would know how to stick and how handle AI regulation and make it safe for everyone. And then the objective is build on that to have economic growth and one larger market that is easier to develop. And last but not least, European legislation always covers the protection of fundamental rights of its citizens. So you see that the idea of the AI Act is actually that AI software could be potentially harmful to people because it will have and take decisions that might affect individuals a lot. And therefore, it's kind of considered to be more like a product liability, product kind of protection regulation. It's less like a GDPR or like a software regulation. It's more like data and product safety rules. So to just begin with, actually, it is really hard to tell what artificial intelligence software actually is. So I brought this kind of markups, and this is actually markups you will all know. That's actually how lawyers talk to each other. And this is like different markups on the definition of AI software in the different drafts. It started with the one from the Commission. On the left-hand side, and on the right-hand side, you just see the final draft at the end. Don't look into it too much detail. The general idea is just the AI Act started off with a like list of AI software technologies that would be regulated in the annex of the draft. And then people actually decided that it's too complicated to have like individual technologies covered. So let's go and move to an idea where we can have like a general definition of AI software. And that's actually when they came up that an AI is meant to be a system that can derive information from data points, and then it infers based on that data the decision on the output of the system. And that is kind of the magic word. The system infers with a certain degree of autonomy. And that's what we call the inference of an AI system. That is actually like a statistical and probabilistic method that can predict results from a given data set. So this is meant to be like the magic word that makes the definition between a AI software and a coded software. But unfortunately, what I hear so far from all software developers that I talk to, like I'm not a software developer, I have like a basic idea, but they all say, well, more or less the AI Act will cover all kind of software in the future, and all software will become AI. So we will have actually this kind of regulation for a very broad scope of technology in the future. So we might all actually have to handle that. And if you develop products, AI Act will become relevant for you when you're in the software industry. To give you an example, you have generally two dividing lines how you should actually look at the AI Act. The first example is if you are a deployer of an AI system. That means a company that uses AI. And to use AI is actually quite easy nowadays. You all will have ChatGPT, I guess. That's what everyone uses more or less. But even if you use Google search, that's machine learning behind. Or if you actually came here this morning using Google Maps, this is actually an AI software as well. So basically any company that offers one of these tools for free or for payment for their employees will actually be considered a company using an AI software. So they will be subject to the AI Act and need, for example, establish the AI literacy, so educate your employees on AI usage. The more and the stricter requirements will hit you when you actually become a provider of an AI system. And this is what we all think first is, oh, well, that is Google and Meta and whoever, they develop AI software, so they are subject to the strict regulations. Unfortunately, not quite. Even if a company just uses a so-called ChatGPT wrapper or develops a white label solution where they just put a trademark on, that happens quite often nowadays actually, this will turn a company into a provider of an AI system. Like a ChatGPT wrapper is, for example, it's like a thin layer of an application interface that collects data, creates a pre-prompt, and then sends the entire prompt to the API of OpenAI in the US. And just by this kind of pre-prompting, you actually turn from a mere deployer of an AI system into a provider of an AI system. And then suddenly the full-blown compliance obligations will hit you. So all kind of financial industries, banking systems that are based on these technologies will actually very easy fall into the scope of the AI Act. The EU already kind of perceived that it will be difficult to implement all the compliance obligations that will come up. So they actually used like a staggered approach. So the requirements will come into effect one by one. It all started off in August last year. And now in February of 2025, the first totally prohibited AI systems must be taken off the market. That are those systems that are considered to have like an overly heavy impact on fundamental rights. We'll look into that in a bit. Then in August, general purpose AI models will be regulated. That is those fundamental models of large language model training, for example, like OpenAI. But also if you use these systems internally, when you develop your own LLMs, for example. And then in August 2026, high-risk AI systems concerning to certain industries will be regulated. And then in August 2027, all of the AI Act will be in full force and effect. So there's still some time, but people are getting prepared by now. As I said before, the AI Act is kind of a product safety act. So there's a risk classification that classifies AI systems given to their risk to the impact on fundamental rights of citizens. And this category is what I outline here. It's always dependent on the certain use cases of an AI system. So the AI Act does not regulate the technology as such because it is AI, but always the use of the AI for a certain purpose. So you always have to find out what is actually the use case for that AI system. And then you have on the top level here, the use cases of an unacceptable risk. They are totally prohibited. That is, for example, social scoring. I will look into that in a bit. And then you have on the second level, high-risk cases. That is all the fintechs and health techs and education techs that we see so often these days, where more and more, and particularly in the startup industry, is developing these days. They are actually subject to detailed compliance obligations. Then last, you have generative AI systems. So that is all what you use perhaps to create the pictures here today on Bitkom. There haven't been like a disclosure that it was generated by AI, but that is actually what you will have to do in the future. So when you talk to people from the movie industries, for example, we will see in all movies, it's all generated by AI in the future. That's quite not very nice and not very customer friendly, but that is actually what the AI Act asks us to do. So starting with one of the kind of prohibited use cases here, I think it's social scoring, which is most interesting for the finance industry. Social scoring is considered to be a system that is prohibited when it evaluates natural persons based on their behavior or personality characteristics. If that social scoring then is leading to a treatment of persons in social contexts that is unrelated to the data that was used, or a treatment that is mere disproportionate based on the social behavior. That sounds all quite abstract, and that is unfortunately the fact that the AI Act was not really negotiated through. They actually stopped it halfway because the European Commission was dissolving and they had to finish the negotiation, otherwise it wouldn't have been finished in the next Commission round actually. So what they now do is actually bring forward more and more explanatory material like Commission guidelines that actually give you an interpretation of how you need to understand the AI Act. And that is actually then quite helpful, and if you look into it, you find out that social scoring is not prohibited per se, but only when it is leading to a detriment treatment of a person, and if there's a causal link between the usage of the AI and the impact of the person. And that is kind of like the silver bullet to get around it. You make sure that a system is not only used to decide upon a people's like social score, like whether he can actually default on the repayment of a banking loan or not, but if you mix that up with other elements of your decision process. So what will be prohibited is a system that just depends on AI decision that you know might from the sketch from Little Britain. If you always just believe in the computer, then actually the system might be prohibited. But if you mix it up and review it by a human in the loop, then it actually will be very likely that it's still allowed to do social scoring using AI. Leaving this prohibited AI category, we go into one more exception we find here, when it is used for the detection of fraud, then actually the system is also allowed. So always make sure that if you use social scoring, perhaps there's an element of fraud detection in there that can actually then justify your usage of the AI system. Leaving this high risk category, we actually go, leaving the prohibited risk category, we go into the high risk category. And that's what I said before, it's different industries where the AI is used. You have an overview of that I give you here. It's, for example, used in employment and workers management. So tools used in HR, for example, to scan CVs of people, whether they actually would fit to a job description, or in the judiciary, when you use it as a legal tech tool for a lawyer, then it's allowed. When you use it for a judge, it's prohibited, because then it actually affects people's outcome in the court case. Example what is relevant here is the use in essential and private public services. And if you go into the definition and look into that, you actually find that it is in particular the usage to evaluate the creditworthiness of natural persons or establish their credit score, or use it in the life and health insurance industry. So banking and finance is prone to decisions where AI can have a very high impact on people's individual fates, whether they get a banking loan or not. And if you look into the recitals of the AI Act, that is the part where the European Commission actually gives the reasoning why certain regulations are established, you will find that this kind of creditworthiness testing is prohibited because it may perpetuate historical patterns of discrimination, such as based on racial, ethnic origins, gender, or disability. Because all the training data that is historic will be used to train the AI. And then actually elements from the past will be kind of perpetuated in the decision, and you will get into like a feedback loop where people might be judged on discriminatory elements that we do want to ban. However, again, here it is allowed to use credit scoring systems if it is used again for the purpose of detection financial fraud. So you always have still to balance what kind of systems you use, and if you have like certain side usage, what is actually then justified and can make the system justified as such. So it heavily depends on how you actually develop the system. If you fall into that category, the company will become subject to very detailed compliance obligations. This is actually a broad source of information that I will spare you here in the morning. I did a webinar on that, so you can scan the QR code and actually watch that on the train or at home if you want. But to sum up, actually, you will have to set up a risk management system and a quality management systems, and get even a CE certificate, what you typically just know from like child toys, the CE certificate, and you need to register your AI system in a database in Europe. I wonder how that turns out when we have like 20,000 of AI use cases per financial industry or per industry as such. However, to sum up, actually this risk management system actually can be broken down into elements of transparency, of the data usage, explainability of the AI, so how does it actually infer a decision making, and technical documentation, cybersecurity is a big element, and so on. And all the elements of the risk management system are meant to give humans control again about the AI. Because there's kind of understanding in the European Commission that AI can develop its life on its own and kind of takes decision that wouldn't be predictable by humans. So give back predictability to the system. Having heard all these risk management systems, you might think that in banking and finance industries, there is already quite a lot of high regulatory density. And that is actually true. Looking into it, you actually find out that there's already general governance processes that we have given by law. And there's in particular one interesting document that is the MI risk that actually stated that data quality procedures must already be implemented when you're using AI models. That you use model results need to be governed and actually reviewed. Models must always be critically evaluated, and there must be an explainability of the AI model that you use. And this was all handed down by the MI risk in 2024, and it is actually kind of a predecessor of what came into the AI Act. And that is here actually where we have certain advantages for finance industries. So the AI Act actually provides that certain risk and quality management systems need not be put in the same strict element as they are, because they are already existing in the AI Act. So this is all the numbers where actually you have advantages for the finance industries. On the other hand, what you unfortunately has been invented more is the so-called fundamental rights impact assessment. Might ring a bell of the data privacy impact assessment. And this is like a document that needs to be provided in the future that evaluates the impact of the usage of AI on fundamental rights of like people using and working in the finance industry, and like in particular in customers, and identify risks and take measures and document all of that. And it needs to be disclosed in case of the authority actually wants to look into it. And this actually rings a bell, I guess, as data protection privacy already did. That now all needs to be implemented until August 2026. So there's still a bit of time. And we actually are expecting to get certain templates by the AI office, but we haven't seen them so far. But the European Commission wants to provide certain guidelines how to actually implement that. Last but not least, the authority and supervision. As I said before, we have the objective to have one uniform framework of AI regulation in Europe. We actually learned, or the European Commission learned, from the experience of the General Data Protection Regulation that actually broke down in different national member states, and in Germany even, down to on the fundamental federal level. So we have different, in every single Bundesland, we have different regulation, and that is super complicated. And the idea here is to have really one uniform regulation. So it turned out that it's not the data protection agencies that will supervise the implementation of the AI Act, but it will be actually the Bundesnetzagentur, the Federal Network Agency, which is quite uncommon, I would say, because it hasn't been so much up in the digital space so far. And for the finance industry, actually, like a more specific authority has been chosen, and that is the BaFin here. So we will have a sectoral supervision for the finance industry in the BaFin and have a more harmonized regulation over there. Unfortunately, what's not falling in there is credit and scoring agencies, so it's just banking and financial institutions. So last but not least, the AI Act is not just restrictions, but I think it is a chance to actually implement useful and credibility into the banking system. When you're using AI systems, it actually make it more explainable and will build trust for customers. So if you haven't started yet, starting to actually educate your employees, think about the AI literacy training that is necessary in the future, create records of AI systems that are used, and check the applicability of the AI Act that can be quite broad, as I said. At the end, you actually need to create a gap analysis and find out which compliance obligations haven't been put in place yet and will do in the future. So thanks for that. Happy to talk about later on, and thanks for listening.